Her child was dying in the snow, until a Navajo warrior lifted them both into his saddle. The wind screamed across the empty plateau, a wild and merciless howl that carved through bone and hope alike. Snow whipped sideways, blinding and bitter, coating everything in a frozen hush. Ruth Caldwell pressed forward, her shawl soaked and stiff, her arms wrapped tight around the small, burning body of her 5-year-old son. Will had stopped speaking hours ago. His head lolled against her chest, breath faint and uneven, skin fever-hot beneath the cold. Ruth's boots sank deeper into the drifts with every step, her legs trembling, her heart pounding not from exertion but fear. "Hold on, baby," she whispered, the words cracking against the wind. "Please, just a little longer." But there was no road, no cabin, no fence post or tree, only white. White and silence and death closing in. Her knees buckled. She stumbled and fell to her side, shielding Will from the snow as she hit the ground. Her face pressed into the frozen crust. The taste of blood filled her mouth. She tried to rise again. She could not. Lying there with the storm curling over them like a shroud, Ruth curled tighter around her child and began to cry, not loudly, not desperately, but softly. The kind of cry that came when there was nothing left but goodbye. Then, hoofbeats. Faint, distant, growing louder. She barely had the strength to lift her head, but she saw a shape move through the veil of snow. A man on horseback, dark against the blizzard, moving with certainty, not panic. He reined in his horse just feet away, dismounted, and approached in long, purposeful strides. Ruth tried to speak, her lips numb. "If you're here to kill me," she rasped, barely audible, "do it fast. But save my son. Please, save my son." The man crouched beside her. His face was stern, angular, and bronze like carved stone. Raven black hair fell past his shoulders. His coat was leather and fur, heavy with snow, and a long knife hung at his side, but he made no move to draw it. Instead, his voice came low and even. "I am not here to kill you." She blinked slowly. "You're Navajo?" He nodded once. "My name is Tenaba." She should have recoiled. Fear had been carved into her since girlhood. Indians were to be feared, distrusted, hated. But in that moment, all she saw was warmth and strength. Tenaba knelt beside Will and placed a hand on the boy's forehead, his brow furrowed. "He is burning. You both will die out here." He stood quickly and whistled once. His horse came forward, snorting against the cold. "I can take one," Ruth said, forcing herself upright. "Take him. Leave me." Tenaba looked at her for a long moment. "I take both." With ease he lifted Will into his arms and mounted the horse. Then he reached down for Ruth. She hesitated, just for a breath. Then she placed her hand in his and let him pull her up. The wind howled louder as they rode, but Ruth no longer felt the cold. She pressed her cheek to Will's head and listened to the steady beat of hooves beneath them. When the sun dipped behind the storm and darkness crept in, they arrived at a cave tucked into the side of a rocky hill. Tenaba dismounted, carried Will inside, then returned to help Ruth down. She could barely walk. Inside, the cave was dry and shielded from the wind. A fire already smoldered, banked with care. Blankets, herbs, and a kettle waited, as if he had known they would come. Tenaba wrapped Will in a buffalo hide and spooned something warm and bitter between his lips. Ruth watched, dazed, every nerve frayed but alive. Only after Will sighed softly in sleep did she find her voice. "Why?" she asked. "Why help us?" Tenaba stirred the fire. His eyes flicked to hers. "Because mercy does not ask what color your skin is," he said. She stared at him for a long time. And then, for the first time in days, Ruth Caldwell slept, her child safe, her heart still, and her fate tied forever to a stranger who had no reason to save her, but did anyway. When Ruth opened her eyes, the light was dim and flickering, amber and low, casting long shadows along the stone walls. The roar of wind had softened into a dull, distant hush, like the breath of a sleeping beast. She was no longer lying in snow. Beneath her was a thick bed of furs, and warmth radiated from a fire burning close by. The scent of pine smoke and damp stone filled her lungs. She sat up too fast. The dizziness hit her like a slap. Her vision swam, and her limbs felt heavy, as if her body had borrowed life and had yet to earn it back. Panic clawed through the fog in her mind. Her eyes searched the room until they landed on the small form curled beside the fire. "Will," she gasped, breath catching. The boy lay bundled beneath a thick buffalo hide, his blonde hair peeking out. His face was no longer the pale shade of wax but tinged with the pink of returning life. His chest rose and fell with a gentle, rhythmic peace. He was alive. The rush of relief hit her so hard it almost knocked her flat. Her hand flew to her mouth as her eyes brimmed. For a heartbeat, everything else disappeared. The storm, the fear, even her pain. He was breathing. But the calm did not last. She turned and saw him. Teneba sat in the far corner of the cave, legs folded beneath him, back straight against the wall. He was grinding something, dried leaves, maybe bark, into a small bowl, movement slow and precise. He looked like he had been carved out of stone, solid, unmoved, silent. His coat was gone, revealing a shirt of stitched hide and strong forearms bound with weathered leather cords. His black hair was pulled back at the nape, a few strands falling loose around his sharp cheekbones. Ruth's pulse quickened. Her hands clutched the edge of the blanket draped around her shoulders. "Why are we here?" she demanded, voice rough. He did not answer immediately. He poured the crushed herbs into a pot of simmering water set near the fire and stirred with a carved wooden spoon. "I said," her voice rose slightly, "why did you bring us here?" He looked up, eyes flickering like the flames between them. "To keep you from dying." "I didn't ask you to," she snapped. He didn't respond. Her chest rose and fell, fast and shallow. "You think I'm supposed to be grateful, is that it? That I owe you something now?" Teneba stood, lifted the pot, and poured the steaming liquid into a wooden cup. He crossed the cave slowly and placed it on the ground beside her. Ruth flinched when he got too close. "Stay back," she warned. "You've done enough." He met her gaze, his face unreadable. "Your child lives. That is enough. Because of you." Her voice trembled now. "You want me to say thank you to an Indian?" Teneba's jaw tightened just slightly. But he said nothing. "I don't need charity from someone like you," she added, spitting the words with more force than she felt. The insult echoed in the stone. Teneba stepped away. He returned to the fire and crouched beside Will, checking the boy's brow with the back of his hand. Will stirred, murmured something soft in his sleep, but did not wake. Ruth stared, her throat tight. She hated the helplessness rising in her like floodwater. She had fought so hard, so long, to need no one, to keep her pride intact. And now it sat in her lap, useless as wet tinder. "I've taken care of Will alone for 5 years," she whispered. "I don't need anyone." Teneba spoke without looking at her. "You were dying." She looked down at her shaking hands. "I would have made it," she muttered. He dropped a coal into the fire, feeding the flames. "No," he said simply. "You would not." The silence that followed was thick and bitter. Her pride begged her to stand, to leave, to prove him wrong. But she couldn't. Because when she looked at her son, breathing, alive, safe, she knew the truth. If not for the man she had been raised to fear, her child would be buried beneath the snow. And that truth lodged deep in her chest, where denial could not reach. Will stirred sometime after dawn. The fire had burned low again, glowing with lazy embers. Ruth was still awake, sitting with her back against the cave wall, blanket clutched to her chest, heart a taut string that had not relaxed in days. She heard a soft sound, barely more than a breath. Her head snapped toward the bundle of hides. Will shifted, his little brow furrowed, and then he made a noise she had not heard in 2 days. "Mama." Ruth dropped the blanket and crawled toward him. "I'm here," she said, voice cracking. "Oh, sweet boy, I'm here." Will's eyes blinked open, bleary but focused. His cheeks, once ashen and sunken, now carried a faint flush. His lips moved wordlessly as she brushed the hair from his face, her fingers trembling. "You're burning less?" she whispered. "You're going to be okay." He smiled, faint and crooked, and for a moment Ruth nearly collapsed from the weight of it all. Tears stung her eyes, hot and uninvited. She pressed a kiss to his forehead and whispered a prayer she barely believed in anymore. Behind her, the fire shifted. A log settled with a quiet crack. Teneba sat just outside the fire's ring of light, sharpening a blade with slow, quiet movements. He had not moved when Will stirred. He had not spoken. He had not looked for thanks. He did not need them. Ruth turned slightly, watching him through the curtain of her hair. He was still. Not stiff, not aggressive, just composed. The firelight lit the side of his face in gold and shadow. His eyes were dark, focused on the blade, but she sensed something softer behind them. Not warmth exactly, but patience. Not many white men would have waited so long. Not many would have done what he did with such silence. She wiped her face, cleared her throat. "You never told me your name," she said. He glanced up, the blade paused mid-stroke. "Teneba," he said. "It means, one who walks with the wind." She blinked. "That's a beautiful name." He did not respond to the compliment, just returned to his blade. "I'm Ruth," she added quietly. "Ruth Caldwell." Teneba nodded once. The silence returned, but it felt different now, not tense, but fragile, like something unsure of whether it was growing or breaking. Ruth sat back beside Will, smoothing the blankets. Her son had already fallen back to sleep, his chest rising and falling with ease. She looked back at Teneba. This time he looked up too. Their eyes met. Not briefly. Not nervously. He looked at her like a man who had seen what the world could do to a person and had learned to wait before trusting it again. She looked at him like someone who had been alone too long to remember what it felt like to be truly seen. And in that moment, the space between them no longer held just suspicion or debt or fear. It held something else. Something quieter. Something waiting. By the fourth morning, the storm had passed, leaving behind a glassy world of snow and silence. The sky was clean blue, the kind that came only after days of gray. Ruth stepped outside the cave, wrapping her shawl tighter around her shoulders. The cold bit at her skin, but it felt almost good, real, bracing, a sign she was still alive. Teneba was feeding the horse nearby, his movements quiet and practiced. She waited until he finished. "I'm going back," she said. He turned slowly, brows slightly raised. "Back?" "To town. To Fort Briar. I need to send word. They'll be worried, Mrs. Farley, the doctor. I need to thank the sheriff. He tried to help us before we left." Teneba stared at her for a long moment. Then he said, evenly, "You go back there, they will not welcome you." She frowned. "You do not know that." "I do." She took a step closer, chin high. "You think I don't belong to my own people now?" "No," he said, calm but firm. "I think your people will not believe you crossed a storm and lived, because a Navajo man carried you through it." Her jaw tensed. "You're saying they'll think what? That I stayed with you on purpose?" Teneba said nothing. He did not have to. Ruth's cheeks flushed with something between shame and fury. "You think I care what people whisper? You think I'd let them make me feel dirty for surviving?" He didn't flinch. "They will not whisper, Ruth. They will shout. They will spit. They will ask what you gave me for your son's life." She reeled back like he'd struck her. "You arrogant bastard. You think I'm too weak to stand tall in front of you cowards?" He looked down, exhaled slowly. "No, I think you are strong. But I've seen what they do to women who come back with stories they do not want to hear." His voice had shifted, deeper, heavier. "I once found a girl," he said, "years ago. Her wagon overturned, her father dead. I brought her back to town on my horse. She cried in my arms the whole way." Ruth stilled. "They met us at the gates, took her from my saddle, and told her to say it was Indians who killed her kin. Her mother believed it. The town believed it. They hunted me for 2 nights with dogs and fire." She opened her mouth, closed it. "I ran. That girl." His throat tightened. "She looked away when they caught me. They broke 2 ribs. Hung me upside down from a tree until an elder traded 3 goats to get me back." Ruth's hands trembled at her sides. "You never told me. You never asked." Silence stretched long between them. The wind whistled through the canyon. The snow shimmered beneath the rising sun. Ruth felt the ground shift beneath her, quietly, irrevocably. She looked at her son, who sat just inside the cave, humming to himself, cheeks pink with life. Her voice was soft when it came. "If I go back, they'll see Will and wonder what happened. They'll wonder why I don't look like a widow anymore. Why my boy survived when he should have frozen." "They will not ask," Teneba said. "They will assume." Ruth looked at him. Really looked. For the first time she saw what he had risked, not just for her life, but his own. And she knew. The path behind her was gone. She could not walk back into the town where she was supposed to belong. Not with the memory of a cave that had saved her. Not with a son who owed his breath to a man they would call savage. She turned her eyes north, to the hills. Then back to Teneba. "What now?" she asked. He did not answer. Not yet. But the fire in his gaze told her the answer was waiting, just beyond the life she used to know. It happened just before dusk. The sun had dipped low behind the canyon ridge, casting long shadows across the snow. Teneba was collecting dry branches near the edge of the clearing while Ruth fed Will, coaxing warm broth into his mouth, 1 small spoonful at a time. Then she heard it, the faint crunch of snow, not from Teneba's direction, but behind them. She turned, heart stuttering, and saw movement at the tree line. 4 men stepped out, rifles in hand, coats heavy with dust and frost. Their faces were familiar in the worst way, men from Fort Briar. Not the sheriff, but others. Hunters, trappers. The kind who did not wait for explanation before drawing judgment. Well, one of them sneered, lowering his gun just enough to make a show of it. "We found our lost widow." Ruth stood, shielding Will instinctively. "What are you doing here?" "We followed your trail. another said. Couple folks saw smoke in these hills. Didn't take much figuring. His eyes darted behind her. Where's the Indian? Tinaba appeared from the rocks, steps silent but deliberate. He carried no weapon in hand, only a bundle of sticks, but the stillness in his body said enough. He looked at Ruth. She gave a slight shake of her head. Don't move. You're coming with us, said the first man. Both of you. No, Ruth said, voice trembling but loud. You don't understand. We understand just fine, the third man spat. You've been sleeping in a hole with a savage. And your boy, his eyes flicked to Will. We don't know what he's seen, or what's been done. You stop right there, Ruth snapped. But one of them, big broad, with a red beard and eyes too eager, moved forward, hand reaching for Will. Back off, Ruth shouted, stepping between them. The man shoved her aside. In a flash, Tinaba dropped the firewood. His body moved like a wave crashing over stone, smooth, fast, brutal. He was on the man in seconds. The two hit the snow with a crack, fists flying, limbs twisting. The white landscape exploded into red noise. The others backed away, too stunned to interfere. Tinaba fought without hesitation, not with rage, with precision. His fists landed like thunder, each blow a statement. When the man tried to reach for his pistol, Tinaba twisted his wrist until bone snapped with a sickening crack. The fight ended almost as fast as it began. The red-bearded man lay groaning in the snow, blood on his lip, his arm useless. Tinaba stood over him, chest rising and falling, face unreadable. He turned slowly toward Ruth. But she was not afraid. She did not flinch. She looked at him, and for the first time she saw him not just as the man who had saved her, or the stranger from a hated tribe. She saw the storm he held back every time he looked at her son. She saw the strength it took not just to protect but to restrain, and she trusted him. The remaining men didn't move. Their leader, clearly shaken, glanced at the wounded man, then at Ruth. You're choosing him? He hissed. I'm choosing the one who didn't try to steal my child, Ruth said coldly. He spat in the snow, muttered something foul, and signaled retreat. They disappeared into the trees, dragging their wounded comrade behind them. Silence settled again. Will clung to Ruth's leg, wide-eyed. She bent down and pulled him close, heart thudding. Tinaba stood motionless. She approached slowly. You didn't have to do that, she whispered. I did, he said. Her voice trembled. I'm not afraid of you. I know. And when their eyes met, it wasn't fear or shock that passed between them. It was something far deeper. It was trust. They did not stop until the horses were near collapse. The frozen plains stretched in all directions, white and endless, broken only by scattered rock and the occasional stand of naked trees. Behind them lay danger, footprints, blood, and a truth Ruth could never unsee. Tinaba had defended her child like a wolf cornered, without hesitation, without question. Ahead of them was only cold. As the sky darkened and stars began to pierce the velvet above, Tinaba found them shelter beneath a sprawling cottonwood at the edge of a frozen creek. Its roots had buckled the land, creating a shallow hollow in the snow. It was no home, no cabin, but it was something. He lifted Will down first. The boy did not stir. His cheek rested against his mother's shoulder, warm with fever and sleep. Ruth moved slowly, her body stiff from cold and hours of riding. Her legs nearly gave as her boots hit the snow. Here, Tinaba said softly, guiding her toward the tree's base. He moved like smoke, quiet, efficient, stripping bark for fire, gathering what branches he could from the surrounding brush. Ruth knelt with Will and cradled him close, whispering nonsense words against his temple. Her breath fogged between them. The air was biting, cruel, the kind of cold that pressed into your bones like guilt. Tinaba returned with a bundle of kindling wrapped in his shirt. He struck flint against steel until a spark caught, growing into a thin, hungry flame. They built a small fire, feeding it carefully, guarding it like breath. When Ruth tried to shift her weight, her teeth chattered so hard she bit her lip. Blood welled. She did not care. Without a word, Tinaba removed his coat and laid it over her shoulders. Ruth looked up. No, she murmured. You'll freeze. He didn't respond. Only sat a few feet away, cross-legged, eyes watching the darkness beyond. Always watching, always waiting. She stared at the coat. It was heavy, lined with hide, smelling faintly of smoke and pine and something older. She pulled it tighter, and something in her chest cracked, not from pain, but from warmth. Real warmth. She shifted, laid Will beside the fire on a bed of furs, and stood. The wind lifted her shawl as she walked toward Tinaba. He did not move as she sat beside him. Not close. but close enough. For a while, neither spoke. The wind whispered through the cottonwood branches. Will let out a soft murmur in his sleep. Then Ruth asked, "Why did you save us?" Tenaba did not look at her. His voice, when it came, was low. "Because someone once chose not to save me." Ruth's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "When I was 10, I was wounded in a raid. My uncle carried me dying for 2 days. We found a wagon camp, white settlers. They had medicine, water, blankets. They saw us. Saw my uncle beg on his knees. He turned his hands over slowly in the firelight, palms calloused, weathered. They turned their faces away. We were not worth a bullet, they said. Not worth a drop." Her throat tightened. "What happened?" "My uncle buried himself in snow so I would stay warm. He died that night. I did not." The silence after his words was vast. Ruth stared at him, heart aching. "I'm sorry," she whispered. He shook his head. "Do not be. I live, but I learned then, if you have the power to save a life and do nothing, you carry that silence forever." She swallowed hard. I did not want to carry that silence again. Ruth reached out before she realized it and placed her hand on top of his. Not in fear. Not in repayment, but with something quieter. Respect. Affection. Beginning. Tenaba looked down at her fingers, so pale against his skin. "I didn't think I could trust anyone again," she said softly. "But tonight I do." He finally looked at her, and his eyes were not hard. They were tired, but warm. "Then you are braver than most," he said. They sat together in the snow, the fire casting gold and shadow across their faces. Will slept peacefully nearby. And in that hush, where no town could judge them and no past could claim them, Ruth leaned slightly closer, her shoulder brushing his. Not a promise, but almost. And Tenaba did not pull away. The path to the village was hidden in folds of mountain, where snow thinned and wind whispered secrets only stone could hold. Ruth had not spoken much during the final leg of the journey, her thoughts tangled, her body worn. Will rode between them, tucked safely in Tenaba's saddle, his arms wrapped tight around the warrior's waist. When the first low huts appeared, carved into red earth and braced with juniper beams, Ruth's breath caught. It was not like the towns she knew. It felt older, wiser, like it had survived things the rest of the world had only imagined. They were met by no welcome, no greeting, only eyes. Men, women, children stepped from doorways and fire circles, watching in silence. Their gazes passed over Tenaba with respect, then lingered wary on Ruth, a white woman, pale as snow, with foreign cloth and foreign footsteps. But none of them said a word when Will slipped from the saddle and took Tenaba's hand. The boy looked back at them once, smiled shyly, then leaned against Tenaba's leg as they walked into the village. The silence broke. One elder stepped forward, tall, gray-braided, wrapped in a robe of buffalo hide. Tenaba called him uncle. They spoke briefly in a language Ruth could not follow, low and musical, like wind brushing canyon walls. The elder's eyes moved to her and narrowed, but he nodded once. They were allowed to stay. That night, they were given a small shelter near the edge of the village. Smoke drifted from the fire pit. Will curled beside her in the blankets, fast asleep. Ruth sat near the flames, staring into the embers, her hands resting in her lap. Tenaba sat across from her, sharpening a blade with slow, even strokes. His silence was never cold. It was something she had grown to understand. It was listening. It was waiting. She watched him for a long time before she spoke. "I do not know what it means," she said quietly, "to love someone who does not look like you, who does not come from your world." His hands paused. "I do not even know if I should say it, or if it's real. But when I see you hold my son's hand, when I remember what it felt like to die in the snow, and wake up breathing because of you, I think I am learning what it means." Tenaba said nothing. Not at first. Instead, he reached into the satchel at his side and drew out a length of sinew. From it hung a single piece of carved turquoise, smoothed by hand and rimmed with bone. He leaned forward and lifted it over her head. The stone rested against her collarbone, cool and ancient. Ruth froze. Her breath caught. "What does this mean?" Still, he said nothing. But his hand lingered against her cheek for just a moment longer than needed. And in that silence, she understood. It was not a proposal. Not a promise made with words. It was an invitation. To stay. To belong. To begin something not bound by vows or ceremony, but by breath and firelight and the long road that had led them here. She touched the stone lightly, then met his eyes, and smiled. Not because she knew where the path led, but because, for the first time, she did not want to walk it alone. Spring came late to the mountains, but it came. The snow melted slow, feeding into streams that ran like veins through red rock and wildflower fields. The village, once still and cautious, now moved with a quiet ease, like lungs remembering how to breathe after too long holding their breath. Ruth had become a part of it. She rose early each morning, just as the sun brushed gold across the cliffs. She swept the floor of the small house she now called home, ground corn, and carried water from the well like the other women. No one asked her to prove herself. They only watched, and in time began to nod in greeting instead of just staring. The children were the first to come. They giggled at her accent when she tried to speak their words, tugged her skirts, handed her feathers and stones as gifts. She began teaching them letters carved into soft bark, songs in English, and in return they taught her the sound of Navajo laughter. She wore dresses now stitched with deep blue and burnt orange thread. The patterns were new, but the weight of them felt right. She no longer flinched when someone reached for her son, because Will, now 6, ran through the village like he had been born to it. He followed Tenaba everywhere. They hunted rabbits together, carved whistles from cedar, whispered stories around the fire when they thought she could not hear. And one night, when Will pressed his head to Tenaba's chest and murmured, "Good night, Dad," Ruth felt something inside her settle, like a river finding its course. She sat by the hearth that night, a length of white cloth in her lap. Her fingers worked slowly, carefully, stitching bright red along the border. It would be a wedding scarf, though no one had said it aloud. Tenaba had never asked her to marry him, and she had never asked for ceremony. But the thread moved forward anyway, stitch by patient stitch. Outside, the moon rose, casting silver across the fields. Inside, the fire cracked, warm and steady. Ruth looked around the room, at the clay pots they had shaped together, at the basket where Will's moccasins lay, at the carved flute Tenaba had left on the shelf. She had not left behind the world. She had simply walked into another one, and it had opened its arms, slow but certain. Later, when Tenaba returned from the ridge, wind in his hair and dust on his boots, she looked up and smiled. He did not ask what she was making, but he sat beside her, and let his knee rest against hers. For a long while they said nothing. And then Ruth whispered, "I died once, in the snow, cold and ready to disappear." Tenaba turned to her, silent. "But love lifted me," she said, voice soft, "onto a horse, into a fire I did not know I still had. And it never put me down again." Tenaba reached for her hand, held it. And in that quiet, Ruth knew there were places no map could draw, no judge could name. But they were real. And they were home. Thank you for riding through this story with us, a journey of survival, sacrifice, and the quiet power of love that rose from snow and silence. Her child was dying in the snow, until a Navajo warrior lifted them both into his saddle as more than a love story. It's a reminder that sometimes, in the space between two worlds, one act of courage, a hand reaching through the storm, can change everything. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe to Wild West Love Stories, where every tale carries dust, danger, and the kind of love that defies bullets, borders, and time. We'll see you in the next story. And remember out here, love doesn't ask permission. It just rides.